What if the year is not 2025, but 1728? Imagine, for a moment, that 300 years of history, 3 entire centuries, were slipped into the timeline like a forged page in an ancient book, so cleverly crafted that no one, not even the sharpest minds of today, noticed the deception. You glance at your calendar, its numbers glowing with certainty, and yet a shiver runs through you. What if time itself is a lie? What if the history you have been taught, the dates etched into your life, are not a record of truth but a story woven by hands long gone, for reasons you can barely fathom? Tonight, you will not just hear a tale. You will walk through it, step by cautious step, into a fog where centuries vanish, where kings and emperors might never have ruled, where the very years you trust could be nothing more than whispers in the dark. A single candle flickers, casting shadows that dance like ghosts across stone walls. You hear a faint rustle, the sound of pages turning, but no one is there. Or are they? Somewhere in the distance, a quill scratches against vellum, writing dates, names, events, writing time itself. But what if those dates were chosen, not recorded? What if someone, centuries ago, decided to reshape the past to fit a grander vision, to align a kingdom with the stars, to make an emperor's reign seem divinely ordained? This is the heart of the phantom time hypothesis, a theory so bold it dares to question the foundation of our calendar. It suggests that nearly 300 years of European history, from 614 to 911 Anno Domini, might have been fabricated, stretched, or simply never existed. The question is not just how this could happen, but why. And once you ask it, you cannot unask it. It lingers, like a shadow you cannot outrun. Welcome to Mystery History for Sleep. I am Mr. H, your guide through the twilight of forgotten truths. If you find yourself drawn to these tales of the strange and the unexplained, I invite you to join me on this journey. A quick tap to like this video, or a moment to subscribe to the channel, maybe even ring that bell for notifications, helps me keep weaving these stories for you. It is a small gesture, but it means the world to those of us who chase mysteries in the quiet hours of the night. Now, let us step back into the shadows, where the past waits to be questioned. You are standing now at the edge of a vast, uncharted field. The grass sways under a moonless sky, and the air feels heavy, as if time itself is holding its breath. The phantom time hypothesis is not just a theory, it is a challenge to everything you have ever believed about history. It whispers that the years between the fall of Rome and the rise of modern Europe might not have unfolded as you were taught. Imagine peeling back the layers of history, like lifting the corner of an ancient tapestry, only to find nothing beneath, no threads, no patterns, just empty space. 3 centuries, gone. No kings, no battles, no chronicles, just silence. The idea feels impossible, absurd even, but it clings to you. Why are there so few records from those years? Why do the artifacts, the buildings, the very bones in the ground seem to pause, as if the world forgot to live for 300 years? This is not about proving the past wrong. It is about wondering what it means if the past was shaped, not by events, but by ambition. Picture a medieval scribe, hunched over a desk in a cold stone room, his quill trembling as he writes, a date, 614, 800, 911, not because he knows it to be true, but because he was told it must be so. Picture an emperor, crowned in a cathedral, his reign timed to fall on a perfect, holy number, the year 1000, a millennium after Christ. What if that number was not a coincidence but a creation? You take a step forward, and the ground feels soft, uncertain. The stars above you shine as they always have, but their light seems to mock the dates we have written below. Tonight, we will walk through this mystery together, not to find answers, but to ask questions that echo through the ages. Are you ready to wonder if time itself might be a story, told so well that we forgot it was ever a fiction? The Dark Ages. The very name conjures images of crumbling castles, mud-soaked villages, and a world plunged into chaos after the fall of Rome. Not a time of barbarity or decay, but a silence so profound it feels as if history itself held its breath for 300 years. Between 614 and 911 Anno Domini, The record of Europe grows thin, almost vanishing, like a river drying up before it reaches the sea. You stand now on the edge of this void, peering into a chasm where centuries should be filled with life, cities, kings, battles and bones, but instead, there is only stillness. The phantom time hypothesis whispers a daring question. What if these years were not lost, but never existed? The Dark Ages, as they are called, stretch across the 7th, 8th and 9th centuries, a period marked by a startling scarcity of evidence. Unlike the Roman Empire before it, with its sprawling roads, detailed annals, and monumental ruins, or the vibrant High Middle Ages that followed, with their cathedrals and charters, this era leaves behind whispers instead of shouts. Where are the chronicles of bustling towns? Where are the shards of pottery, the rusted tools, the graves of the countless who should have lived and died? The archaeological record grows quiet, almost mute, as if entire generations left no trace. You kneel beside a dig site in what was once a Frankish village. The soil yields Roman coins from the 5th century, then leaps forward to fragments from the 10th, but the layers between are barren, like pages torn from a book. This is not mere absence. It is a pattern, repeating across Europe from the fields of France to the hills of Hungary. Consider the cities. Rome, once the heart of an empire, should have left echoes of its decline, crumbling aqueducts, abandoned forums, or at least the debris of daily life. Yet, for these 3 centuries, the eternal city seems to pause. Excavations reveal Roman foundations, then a sudden surge of activity in the 10th century, but the intervening years offer little. A few scattered coins, a handful of pottery shards, and silence. In Aachen, the supposed capital of Charlemagne's empire, archaeologists find grand structures dated to the 8th century, but the layers beneath are thin, lacking the gradual build-up you would expect from a thriving imperial seat. It is as if the city sprang to life fully formed, without the messy, incremental growth of a lived history. You trace your fingers along the edge of a broken wall, wondering, did people simply stop building, stop breaking, stop living, or did the years themselves stop passing? The silence extends to the villages too. In what is now Germany, sunken floor houses, Grubenhäuser, dot the landscape until the 7th century, then vanish. No evolution, no adaptation, just absence. When they reappear in the 10th century, their designs are markedly different, as if no one occupied the land in between. Cemeteries tell a similar tale. In England, Anglo-Saxon graves from the 6th century brim with jewelry, weapons, and markers of status. But by the 8th century, burials become sparse, unmarked, and strangely uniform. Then, after 900, graveyards bloom again, filled with Christian crosses and dated epitaphs. You stand in one such field, the wind carrying the faint hum of a distant river. The earth should hold the weight of centuries, 10 generations of births, deaths, and dreams, but it feels light, unburdened, as if time skipped over this place. Now, let us wander into the realm of legend, where whispers of lost cities and forgotten peoples weave through the fog of history. In Russia, the tale of Kitej, a city said to have vanished beneath a lake in the early Middle Ages, lingers like a half-remembered dream. Some say it sank to escape invaders, its bells still ringing beneath the water. Could such stories be echoes of a time that never was, a way to explain the absence of entire communities in the record? In Ireland, myths speak of hollow hills, where ancient peoples disappeared, leaving no trace but their stories. These tales, dismissed as folklore, share a curious thread. They cluster around the phantom centuries, as if the collective memory of Europe sensed a gap and filled it with ghosts. You pause by a lakeside, imagining a city submerged not by water, but by time itself, its spires hidden in a calendar that was never written. Yet, the silence is not absolute. Some evidence persists, scattered, fragile, like footprints in sand. A few manuscripts survive, their parchment pristine, their Latin oddly polished for an age of supposed chaos. In a monastery in Italy, a chronicle dated to 750 describes a local saint, but its script mimics styles not seen until the 11th century. In Germany, a coin stamped with a king's name from 800 appears, but its craftsmanship echoes coins minted 200 years later. These artifacts are real, but their dates feel like guesses, pinned to a timeline that does not quite fit. You hold one such coin. Its edge is worn, but its design too sharp, too perfect. Did it circulate in a bustling market? Or was it crafted later, a prop in a play no one knew they were performing? Science offers explanations for this void, but they falter under scrutiny. Archaeologists point to population decline, plagues, or invasions as reasons for the scarcity of evidence. The fall of Rome, they say, triggered a collapse in trade, literacy, and urban life, leaving fewer traces. But this reasoning stumbles when you consider the scale. Even in times of crisis, humans leave marks, broken pots, burned timbers, buried bones. The Black Death of the 14th century, a far greater catastrophe, left behind mass graves, abandoned villages, and countless records. Yet, the Dark Ages offer no such abundance. The math does not add up. A population reduced by half would still leave millions across Europe, enough to fill cemeteries, to wear paths in the earth, to shatter bowls in their kitchens. Where are they? You walk through a forest, once farmland, now reclaimed by roots and moss. The soil should hold their stories, but it is quiet, as if the land forgot its people. Now, consider a stranger possibility. What if the silence is not a failure of preservation, but a clue to something deeper? The phantom time hypothesis suggests that these centuries were not just poorly documented, they were invented. Imagine a scribe in the 10th century, tasked with writing the history of a kingdom. The records are sparse, the years uncertain. To bridge the gap between Rome's fall and the present, he stretches the timeline, adding reigns, battles, and saints that never were. Not out of malice, but necessity to give his king legitimacy, to make the church eternal, to align the stars with prophecy. You see him now, his candle burning low, his quill hesitating. He writes, Anno Domini 700, not because he knows it is true, but because it must be. The story takes hold, copied by others, carved into stone, until the fiction becomes fact. But why would such a deception endure? Because history is not just a record, it is a foundation. Empires need roots, churches need antiquity, and rulers need ancestors. If 3 centuries were missing, admitting it would unravel the tapestry of Europe's past. Cathedrals would lose their ancient pedigrees, kings would lose their divine mandates, and the calendar itself would wobble. You stand in the ruins of a Roman road, its stones worn but unbroken. Above it, a medieval bridge rises, dated to 850, yet its arches mirror designs from 1050. The gap between them feels deliberate, as if someone needed to fill the space with a story. You wonder, is this road a relic of time, or a monument to its absence? You step back from the Roman road, the bridge above it standing silent, its arches a testament to a time that may never have been. The phantom time hypothesis lingers, a question that refuses to fade. Were these centuries lived, or were they written to fill a void no one dared to name? The soil beneath your feet holds secrets it will not share, but the silence speaks louder than any chronicle. As you stand in this quiet place, where history seems to pause, I wonder where you are listening from. Perhaps you are in a bustling city, the glow of streetlights outside your window, or maybe a quiet village, where the night is as still as this forgotten field. What time is it there, as you ponder these missing years? Did Europe's people live through these silent years, or did time itself hold its breath, leaving only stories in its wake? You stand in the shadow of a grand cathedral, its stones towering above you, their surfaces etched with the weight of centuries. The plaque at the entrance reads, Aachen, founded by Charlemagne, Anno Domini 800. The name echoes through history. Charles the Great, the father of Europe, the warrior king who forged an empire from the ashes of Rome and crowned himself emperor on a snowy Christmas morning. His story is woven into the very fabric of the Western world, taught in schools, immortalized in statues, and celebrated as the cornerstone of the Middle Ages. But as you run your hand along the cold stone, a question stirs, sharp and unsettling. What if Charlemagne is not a man, but a myth? What if the emperor who united Europe, revived learning, and reshaped time itself was a creation, a carefully crafted figure designed to bridge a gap in history that never existed. The phantom time hypothesis dares to ask, is Charlemagne a legend born of flesh and blood, or a product of ink and ambition, sculpted to fill a void in the timeline? Picture Aachen in the year 800, or so the chronicles claim. The Palatine Chapel rises, its dome gleaming with mosaics that echo Byzantine splendor. Charlemagne, tall and commanding, kneels before Pope Leo III, who places a golden crown upon his head. The moment is perfect, too perfect. The date, December 25, aligns with the birth of Christ. The year, 800, feels like a divine milestone. But when you dig beneath the surface, the ground grows soft. The chapel's stones, though ancient, bear tool marks that match techniques from the 10th century, not the 8th. The mosaics, vibrant and intricate, resemble those found in churches built 200 years later. You pause, your breath catching. Is this a cathedral built by an emperor, or a stage set for a legend? The records of Charlemagne's reign are equally puzzling. The Royal Frankish Annals, the official chronicle of his time, describe a ruler who conquered nations, standardized laws, and sparked a cultural renaissance. Yet these annals, so detailed in their accounts of battles and decrees, were written decades after his death, often by scribes with agendas of their own. You open one such manuscript, its pages crisp despite their supposed age. The Latin is flawless, the script Carolingian minuscule too uniform, as if crafted in a single burst rather than over generations. Compare this to the Roman Empire, where letters, tax records, and graffiti fill every corner of the archaeological record. For a man of Charlemagne's stature, the physical evidence is startlingly scarce. A few coins bear his name, but their designs mirror those from later centuries. A golden throne in Aachen, said to mark his burial, yields only fragments when opened bones that could belong to anyone, artifacts that lack the grandeur of an emperor's tomb. You stand before this empty sepulchre, wondering, where is the man who shaped a continent? Now, let us entertain a stranger thought. What if Charlemagne was not one man, but many? The phantom time hypothesis suggests he might be a composite, a figure stitched together from the deeds of lesser kings, their stories merged to create a hero for a fractured Europe. Imagine a 10th century court, desperate for unity after centuries of division. The memory of Rome lingers, its glory a beacon for ambitious rulers. To claim that legacy, they need a bridge, a figure who can connect the fallen empire to the new Holy Roman Empire. Enter Charlemagne, a name meaning Charles the Great, as if designed for legend. His coronation, his laws, his wars they mirror, Roman triumphs, almost too neatly. You trace the threads of his story. A Saxon campaign that echoes Caesar's conquests, a patronage of scholars that recalls Augustus, a crowning by the Pope that mimics Constantine's divine favor. Is this history, or is it homage, crafted to make the present feel eternal? The archaeological record only deepens the mystery. In Aachen, the capital of Charlemagne's empire, you expect layers of life palaces, markets, barracks, yet excavations reveal a curious sparsity. The foundations of the Palatine Chapel are real, but the layers beneath are thin, lacking the debris of a bustling imperial hub. Across Europe, sites linked to Charlemagne's reign fortresses in Germany, churches in France show similar gaps. A fort dated to 790 yields pottery from the 10th century, a church attributed to 800 uses arches seen in 11th century designs. You walk through these sites, your footsteps echoing in the quiet. If an empire thrived here, where are its bones? Where are the broken swords, the worn cobblestones, the ash of its hearths? The silence feels deliberate, as if the past was not lived, but written. Let us turn to the legends that surround him. In medieval Europe, Charlemagne became more than a king, he was a myth. Songs and sagas, like the Song of Roland, paint him as a warrior saint, battling infidels and wielding a sword blessed by God. But these tales were written centuries after his death, their details shifting with each retelling. In one chronicle, he is a scholar king, fluent in Latin and Greek. In another, he cannot write his own name. In some stories, he single-handedly defeats armies, In others, he orchestrates his coronation as a surprise. You sift through these accounts, each one vibrant but contradictory, like reflections in a shattered mirror. Could a single man inspire such a kaleidoscope of tales, or were these stories crafted to fill a need, to give Europe a founder it could rally behind? Now, consider a darker possibility. What if Charlemagne's empire was a fiction, not of deceit, but of necessity? In the 10th century, as the Holy Roman Empire emerged under Otto I, Europe needed a narrative to rival Rome's grandeur. Without a unifying figure, the gap between Rome's fall and the new empire loomed large 3 centuries of chaos, too empty to explain. So, scribes and scholars, perhaps under imperial orders, began to weave a story. They borrowed from Roman histories, from tales of Constantine and Justinian, and created Charlemagne, a king who united tribes, spread Christianity, and revived learning. His empire became the glue that held the timeline together. You imagine a monk in a scriptorium, his quill moving swiftly, inventing battles that never happened, dating charters to years that never passed. He does not lie, he believes he is restoring a truth that should have been. Science steps in to challenge this tale, but it raises as many questions as it answers. Radiocarbon dating, the gold standard of archaeology, struggles with Charlemagne's era. A sword found in a grave dated to 800 yields, a carbon date closer to 950. Timber from a supposed Carolingian hall shows growth rings that align with the 11th century. Scholars dismiss these as anomalies, reused materials, contaminated samples, but the pattern repeats. You hold a fragment of bone, said to be from a warrior of Charlemagne's court. Its isotopes suggest a diet more common in later centuries. The data does not lie, but the context does. Archaeologists rely on historical records to date their finds. But what if those records were written to deceive? You feel the weight of this circular logic. A loop where history validates archaeology, and archaeology validates history, with no firm anchor to the truth. Yet, there are those who defend Charlemagne's reality. The Annales Regni Francorum, though written after his death, detail his campaigns with precision. The conquest of the Saxons, the defeat of the Lombards, the alliance with the Pope. Charters bearing his seal survive, their parchment aged but intact. In rhymes, a cathedral claims relics from his reign, a chalice, a cross venerated for centuries. You touch these objects, their surfaces worn by time and devotion. Could they be real? Could Charlemagne have walked these halls, his footsteps echoing through history? Historians argue that the scarcity of evidence is no surprise. The Dark Ages were chaotic, records were lost, and parchment was precious. But this explanation falters when you compare it to other eras. The Roman Empire, even in decline, left mountains of debris. The High Middle Ages overflow with manuscripts. Why, then, does Charlemagne's empire leave so little? A whisper of conspiracy emerges. Some scholars, like Heribert Illig, propose that Charlemagne was a fabrication, not of one liar, but of a collective effort. In the 10th century, as Otto III sought to cement his rule, he needed a predecessor to rival Rome's emperors. Charlemagne became that figure, his story retrofitted into the timeline. The coronation of 800, the Carolingian Renaissance, the laws and schools all could have been crafted later, dated to an earlier era to give the new empire legitimacy. You imagine a council of scribes, their candles burning low, debating how to make Otto's reign seem like the culmination of a 1,000-year plan. They rewrite annals, mint coins with Charlemagne's name, and build churches to house his memory. The lie is not malicious, it is practical, a way to unify a fractured world under a shared past. Perhaps Charlemagne existed, but his legend was exaggerated. His deeds stretched to fill a historical void. His empire, though real, may have been smaller, less grand than the chronicles claim. The Carolingian Renaissance, with its schools and scripts, might have been a seed planted in the 9th century, only blooming in the 10th or 11th. You walk through a reconstructed Carolingian schoolroom, its desks lined with imagined manuscripts. The air smells of ink and possibility. If Charlemagne was real, his story was shaped by those who came after, each generation adding layers to his myth. A king became an emperor, a man became a legend, and 3 centuries were filled with his shadow. You stand now before a statue of Charlemagne, his bronze gaze fixed on a horizon you cannot see. His sword is raised, his crown gleams, but the base of the statue is cracked, the date 800 worn by time. You wonder, is this a monument to a man or to a story? The phantom time hypothesis does not demand that Charlemagne never lived, but it asks you to question the timeline that holds him. If 300 years were added to history, his reign becomes a pivot, a point where time was bent to serve power. The question lingers, unanswered. Was Charlemagne a king who shaped Europe, or a myth that shaped time itself? The cathedral bells toll, but their sound feels hollow, as if mourning a truth that may never be found. The sky is a silent witness, its stars and planets tracing paths no human hand can alter. Across centuries, civilizations have looked upward, charting the heavens with awe and precision, their records etched in stone, ink, and memory. Eclipses, those fleeting moments when the sun or moon vanishes, have always been moments of wonder and dread, moments too profound to forget. Yet, in the heart of Europe's dark ages, between 614 and 911 Anno Domini, the sky seems to fall silent. The phantom time hypothesis points to this silence as a clue. What if the years we call the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries were not lived but invented? What if the stars, unyielding in their truth, reveal a timeline that does not align with the one we have written? Let us climb into the heavens, not as astronomers, but as seekers of a truth the earth has forgotten, chasing eclipses that may unravel the very fabric of time. Imagine a total solar eclipse in the year 719, its shadow sweeping across northern Europe. The birds fall silent, the air grows cold, and for a few minutes, day becomes night. Such an event would sear itself into memory, a spectacle no scribe could ignore. In China, astronomers of the Tang dynasty record it with meticulous detail, noting the date, the path, and the hour. Their star charts, preserved in ancient libraries, align with modern calculations, their precision a testament to a civilization that measured time with care. But in Europe, where monks and chroniclers watched the same sky, the record is strangely blank. You leaf through a tattered manuscript in a forgotten abbey, searching for mention of that darkened day. Nothing. The absence is not a single oversight, it repeats across decades, across centuries. Eclipses that should have been seen in Francia, in Anglo-Saxon England, in the crumbling remnants of Rome, go unmentioned, as if the sky itself was erased. This silence is no accident. Eclipses are predictable, their paths traceable backward through time with the algorithms of modern astronomy. Scientists today can pinpoint every solar and lunar eclipse from the past 2 millennia, mapping their shadows across continents. You sit at a table, a star chart spread before you, its lines marking an eclipse in 807 that should have crossed northern France. The calculations are clear, the moon's shadow fell, the light dimmed, yet the chronicles from that year, from that region, say nothing. A monk in a nearby cloister writes of a king's coronation, a harvest festival, but not a word about the sky turning black. You turn to another date, 733, when an eclipse should have been visible in Italy. Again, silence. The pattern emerges like a constellation. Where the stars speak, the records do not. Could it be that these years, these centuries, were not there to witness the heavens? Let us delve deeper, to the calendars that governed medieval life. The Julian calendar, instituted by Julius Caesar in 45 before Christ, was the backbone of European timekeeping, but it was flawed, drifting from the solar year by 11 minutes annually, a small error that compounded over centuries. By 1582, when Pope Gregory XIII reformed the calendar, the spring equinox had slipped from March 21 to March 11, a 10-day gap. To correct it, Gregory erased 10 days from October, leaping from the 4th to the 15th. You pause, your mind turning over the numbers. After 1600 years, the Julian calendar's drift should have been 13 days, not 10. 3 days are missing, equivalent to roughly 300 years of accumulated error. The phantom time hypothesis seizes on this discrepancy. What if the calendar was corrected for fewer years because those years never existed? You imagine a scribe in the 16th century, recalculating dates, unaware that the timeline he trusted was built on a foundation of invented centuries. But the stars do not lie, and other civilizations offer a mirror to Europe's silence. In the Islamic world, astronomers like al-Biruni and al-Zarqali crafted astrolabes and wrote treatises on the heavens, their lunar calendars guiding prayers and festivals. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, founded in the early 9th century, scholars recorded eclipses with precision, their observations matching modern reconstructions. You hold an ancient astrolabe, its bronze cool against your palm, its dials aligned to a sky that never changes. These records, vibrant and unbroken, stand in stark contrast to Europe's sparse chronicles. An eclipse noted in 760 by Muslim astronomers finds no echo in Frankish or Anglo-Saxon texts. Why? Were European monks too distracted by war and faith to look up, or were the years they lived in not the years we think? Now, let us chase a stranger thread, one woven with whispers of the supernatural. Across medieval Europe, eclipses were not just astronomical events, they were omens, signs of divine wrath or prophecy. In Ireland, a legend tells of a day without sun, in the 8th century, when the sky darkened and a monk prophesied the fall of a king. But the tale, recorded centuries later, places the eclipse in a year that does not match modern calculations. In Germany, a chronicle speaks of a black sun heralding a battle, yet the date 792 corresponds to no known eclipse. You wander through a village square, imagining the fear such an event would inspire, the rush to record it in trembling script. These stories exist, but their dates are wrong, as if pinned to a timeline that does not fit. Could these be echoes of real events, misplaced by scribes who reshaped time, or are they fictions crafted to fill a narrative void? Science steps in to anchor these questions, but it raises new ones. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, offers a precise record of time, each ring marking a year's growth. In Europe, ancient timbers from churches and halls dated to the 8th century sometimes show growth patterns better suited to the 10th or 11th. You examine a wooden beam, its rings tight and clear, but the dates do not align. A church in Bavaria, said to be built in 800, yields timber that grew closer to 950. Scholars explain this as reused wood, a common practice in a resource-scarce world. But how many beams must be reused before the dates themselves come into question? Carbon dating, another tool, is equally troubling. A relic from a supposed 8th century shrine tests as 200 years younger. The margins of error are wide, but the pattern is consistent. The physical evidence leans forward, toward a later time, as if the 8th century is a ghost. Yet, there are those who argue the silence is explainable. Medieval Europe was a fractured place, they say, its monasteries scattered, its scribes few. Eclipses, though dramatic, might have been overlooked in an age of survival and faith. Earth's rotation, too, has slowed imperceptibly over millennia, complicating modern calculations. You consider this, standing beneath a sky that has seen empires rise and fall. The explanations are reasonable, but they stretch thin when you tally the absences. Chinese astronomers, unburdened by Europe's chaos, recorded every eclipse with care. Islamic scholars, in the midst of their own golden age, noted the heavens' rhythms without fail. Why then did Europe's sky go unwatched? You imagine a monk, his eyes fixed on a parchment, ignoring the darkened day outside. It is possible, but unlikely, that so many moments of cosmic awe went unrecorded. What if the eclipses were seen, but the years were not? The phantom time hypothesis suggests that the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries were crafted later, their events and dates assigned to fill a gap. He knows the sky's cycles, but the records are sparse. To make sense of the past, he recalculates, retrofitting eclipses to fit a timeline that serves his king or church. You see him, his quill scratching in the candlelight, adjusting dates to match a prophecy, a coronation, a divine plan. The eclipse of 719 becomes 614, the battle of 792 becomes 911, and the timeline shifts, seamless in its deception. You stand now in a stone chamber, its ceiling pierced with holes that let sunlight trace patterns across the floor. This is no modern planetarium, but a medieval observatory, where monks and scholars once tracked the heavens. The walls are carved with zodiac signs, their lines worn but precise. Yet, even here, the records falter. The liturgical calendar, tied to the moon and sun, drifted in these centuries, its feasts and fasts misaligned with the seasons. Easter, the cornerstone of Christian time, slipped from its springtime anchor, sparking debates that lasted centuries. You wonder, if the sky was so carefully watched, why did the calendar fail? The stars did not move, but the years did, as if time itself was rewritten to match a story no one dared to question. The sky above you darkens now, not with an eclipse, but with the weight of doubt. The stars, eternal and unyielding, hold a truth that slips through human hands. You look up, searching for answers in the constellations. They offer none, only the quiet certainty of their orbits. The question remains, burning brighter than any star, did Europe's monks fail to see the sky, or did they live in years that never saw the light? You find yourself in a dimly lit chamber, its walls lined with glass cases that gleam with the weight of sacred history. Before you, relics rest in silent reverence, a splinter of the true cross, a thorn from Christ's crown, a vial said to hold the tears of a saint. Each is adorned with a date, a story, a promise of eternity, tying the faithful to a past that feels ancient and divine. The phantom time hypothesis casts a shadow over these holy objects, suggesting that the relics and the churches that house them may not be anchors of history, but tools of a grand deception. Between 614 and 911 Anno Domini, when Europe's timeline grows thin, these sacred artifacts and stone sanctuaries appear as if conjured. Their ages often claim to be centuries older than their craftsmanship suggests. Let us step into this sacred space, not as pilgrims seeking miracles, but as skeptics chasing the truth behind the dates carved in marble. The air is heavy with incense, the flicker of candles casting golden light across a reliquary. A sign declares it holds a bone of Saint Benedict, dated to 672, a relic venerated for centuries. Yet, as you examine the case, a detail catches your eye. The filigree work, intricate and polished, mirrors designs not seen until the 11th century. You turn to another relic, a fragment of cloth labelled as the robe of St. Luke, said to have been placed here in 872 during the reign of Charles the Bald. But a nearby archive, tucked in a dusty corner, records the same relic as a gift from a nobleman in 1121. The discrepancy is small, but it echoes across the room. Relics, the very bones of faith, were the currency of medieval power. A saint's finger could draw pilgrims, fill coffers, and elevate a church to a cathedral. But what if their dates were chosen, not discovered? Walk now through the nave of a church, its walls rising in solemn grey stone. The plaque at the entrance claims it was built in 739, a gift from a long-dead bishop. You trace the mortar between the stones, its texture rough but uniform, a style that matches churches dated to 950 or later. The arches above, simple and rounded, are hailed as early medieval, yet their precision aligns with Romanesque designs of the 11th century. You pause at a carved cross, its vines and figures, worn but clear, dated to 750. Across Europe, from Burgundy to Bavaria, similar crosses bear identical motifs, some labelled 850, others 1050, as if time stood still for 300 years. The uniformity is striking, almost unnatural. Art and architecture evolve, tools change, styles shift, hands falter, yet these sacred spaces, these holy markers, seem frozen, as if crafted in a single era and scattered across centuries to create the illusion of continuity. The phantom time hypothesis suggests a bold answer. These churches, these relics, were backdated, their origins rewritten to give the medieval church a deeper past. Imagine a bishop in the 10th century, eager to claim apostolic roots for his diocese. A new cathedral needs prestige, so he declares it founded in 712 by a wandering saint. The story takes hold, a charter is written, a relic is discovered. No one questions it. Literacy is rare, travel is perilous, and faith outweighs doubt. You see the bishop now, standing before his flock, his voice resonant as he unveils a bone said to belong to St. Peter. The crowd gasps, their donations flow, and the church's claim to antiquity is sealed. But the bone, the charter, the date, they are new, crafted to match a narrative that ties the present to a divine past. The lie is not malicious. It is devout, a restoration of what should have been. Science steps into this sacred space, its tools probing the relics and stones for truth. Radiocarbon dating, a method that measures the decay of organic matter, offers a glimpse into the past. A wooden reliquary, claimed to be from 800, tests closer to 950. A fragment of cloth, said to be from 672, yields a date near 1100. You hold these results, their numbers stark against the claims of centuries. Scholars explain the discrepancies as errors, reused materials, contaminated samples, but the pattern repeats. In a crypt beneath a French church, bones dated to the 8th century show wear consistent with the 11th. The calibration curves, built on tree rings and volcanic ash, rely on historical assumptions, and when those assumptions falter, the dates collapse. You wonder, are the relics wrong, or is the timeline itself a forgery? Now, let us chase a stranger thread, one woven with whispers of the miraculous. In medieval Europe, relics were more than objects, they were stories, living proof of God's presence. Tales abound of bones that glowed in the dark, staffs that turned snakes to stone, hair that grew after death. You read a hagiography, a saint's life dated to 630, describing miracles that echo tales from the 12th century. The manuscript, luminous with gold leaf, was written in 1103, centuries after the saint's supposed death. The story claims earlier versions were lost to Viking raids or fire, but the excuse feels thin. Across Europe, churches boast identical relics: 3 skulls of St. John, 2 crowns of thorns, countless splinters of the true cross. You stand before a glass case, its contents shimmering with faith, but the math does not add up. If every relic is true, the saints must have had many lives, or the relics are stories, crafted to fill a gap in time. The churches themselves tell a similar tale. In Spain, a chapel dated to 800 boasts mosaics with glazes not used until 1000. In Norway, a stave church claims roots in the 9th century, but its runes and timbers date to the 12th. You walk through a crypt, its barrel vaults attributed to 850, yet the chisel marks match those of later Romanesque builders. Historians argue that these churches reused Roman materials, their columns and tiles salvaged from older ruins. But the placement is too perfect, the symbolism too deliberate, as if the builders were not reusing, but recreating an ancient aesthetic. You touch a Roman column, its marble smooth under your fingers. It stands in a church dated to 790, but the mortar around it is fresh, the floor tiles too uniform. Is this continuity, or a deliberate echo of a past that never was? The motive behind such a deception is not hard to find. In the Middle Ages, antiquity was power. A church founded in 700 held more sway than one built in 1000. A relic from the 7th century drew more pilgrims than one from the 10th. You imagine a council of bishops, their robes heavy with authority, debating how to elevate their diocese. A new relic is needed, a new history. A scribe is summoned, a date chosen 732, 800, 911, not because it is true, but because it fits. The church's claim to land, to relics, to divine favor depends on its age, so age is invented. You see the scribe, his quill steady, writing a charter that declares the church's founding 3 centuries earlier. The parchment is aged, the ink faded by design, and the story becomes truth. Historians point to surviving charters, their seals intact, their dates precise. In Reims, a cathedral claims a baptismal font used by Charlemagne himself, its stone worn by centuries of touch. In Rome, The Vatican archives hold manuscripts from the 8th century, their Latin clear, their stories vivid. Could these be the work of later hands, crafted to fill a gap? Or are they genuine, survivors of a turbulent age? The defenders argue that the Dark Ages were a time of scarcity, when parchment was reused, buildings left to crumble, and relics lost to war. But the scarcity is too consistent, too widespread, as if the entire continent conspired to leave no trace. You step back from the stained glass window, its colours fading into the twilight, the saint's face gazing down with an expression both serene and enigmatic. The inscription, Anno Domini 794, seems to pulse with a question: is this a window to the past, or a mirror reflecting a story we chose to believe? The phantom time hypothesis lingers, a challenge to the dates carved in stone, the relics enshrined in gold, the churches that stand as silent sentinels of a time that may not have been. As you stand in this sacred space, surrounded by the echoes of faith and doubt, I wonder if you feel the same pull to unravel these mysteries. If these tales of hidden centuries spark your curiosity, consider joining me for more journeys like this, perhaps with a quick tap to subscribe or a click to ring the bell for new stories. Your thoughts matter too. Share them below, and let me know what secrets you think these stones might hold. The church is quiet now, but its walls hum with questions. Were they built in the Dark Ages, or crafted later to anchor a past that never truly existed? You sit at the edge of a grand hall, its marble floors gleaming under the flicker of torchlight. Above you, a fresco depicts a young emperor, his crown heavy with jewels, his gaze fixed on a future he intends to shape. This is Otto III, Holy Roman Emperor, a ruler whose ambition burned brighter than the stars. The year is said to be 1000, a number so perfect it feels ordained by heaven, a millennium after the birth of Christ. The phantom time hypothesis points to Otto III as the architect of a grand conspiracy, a man who, with the aid of a pope and a scholar, may have bent time itself to make his reign a divine milestone. Was the year 1000 a moment of destiny, or a fiction crafted to crown an emperor with the weight of eternity? Let us slip into the corridors of power, not as courtiers, but as silent observers, piecing together a plot where dates were not recorded, but chosen. The hall is alive with the murmur of voices, bishops, scribes, and nobles, their robes rustling as they gather around a table strewn with parchments. Otto III, barely 20, stands at the centre, his presence commanding despite his youth. Beside him is Pope Sylvester II, a former monk whose mind is as sharp as the astrolabes he once crafted. Nearby, Gerbert of Aurillac, the scholar who would become Sylvester, flips through a tome of Roman history, his fingers tracing dates that do not quite align. These three men, bound by ambition and intellect, share a vision to make Otto's reign the pinnacle of a 1000-year Christian narrative. The year is not 1000 not yet. So, they devise a plan, not to deceive, but to fulfill a divine order, to align the stars with the throne. The year 1000 held a power beyond mere numbers. In medieval Christendom, it was a beacon, a moment pregnant with eschatological meaning, judgment, resurrection, renewal. To rule at such a time was to be touched by God, to stand at the edge of eternity. Otto III, crowned at 16, dreamed of a revived Roman Empire, a new Rome under his command. But the dates, calculated from the birth of Christ, placed his reign too early, in the 980 seconds or 990 seconds. The solution was elegant, subtle, and audacious. Shift the timeline, adjust the chronicles, rewrite the charters, nudge the years forward until Otto's coronation aligns with the millennium. You imagine the trio in a candlelit chamber, their voices low, debating how to make history bend. Gerbert, with his knowledge of mathematics and astronomy, recalculates the years. Sylvester, with his papal authority, sanctifies the change. Otto, with his imperial will, ensures it is written into the record. The evidence of this shift is subtle, hidden in the folds of history. You examine a charter, its wax seal bearing Otto's name, dated Anno Domini 1000. The parchment is pristine, the script precise, but something feels off. The language mirrors texts from later decades, the dates too perfectly aligned with the millennium. In the Vatican archives, a papal bull from Sylvester's reign declares a festival for the year 1000, but its phrasing echoes documents from the 11th century. You turn to the chronicles, the Annales Quedlinburgenses, which describe Otto's reign with vivid detail. His coronation, his campaigns, his vision of a Christian empire. But these accounts were written years after his death, their authors drawing from sources that no longer exist or perhaps never did. The records are real, but their dates feel like a performance, a carefully staged act to make the present eternal. Now, let us chase a darker thread, one woven with whispers of ambition and power. The phantom time hypothesis suggests that Otto, Sylvester, and Gerbert did not merely adjust dates, they created centuries. The years between 614 and 911, the so-called phantom centuries, may have been inserted to bridge the gap between Rome's fall and Otto's rise. Imagine the stakes. A new empire, fragile and fractious, needs a history to rival Rome's grandeur. Without a glorious past, Otto is just a young king, his throne unsteady. So the trio crafts a narrative, populating the missing years with kings, battles, and saints. Charlemagne, the great predecessor, becomes the cornerstone, his reign dated to 800 to anchor the timeline. You see Gerbert, his mind alight with calculations, suggesting a new chronology. A few charters are rewritten, a coronation redated, a list of kings extended. The change is small, incremental, but its ripples reshape the past. The motive is clear: legitimacy. In a world where power rested on divine sanction, a reign time to the year 1000 was a claim to God's favor. Otto's court, filled with scholars trained in the classics, knew the power of narrative. They had studied Rome, Byzantium, and the Islamic world, where history was a tool of empire. You walk through Aachen, where Otto held court, its halls echoing with the memory of Charlemagne. But the stones tell a different story. The Palatine Chapel, said to be built in 800, bears mosaics and arches that resemble Byzantine designs from the 10th century. A statue of Otto, erected to celebrate his reign, stands on a pedestal dated 1000, but its craftsmanship hints at later hands. The evidence is not absent, it is misaligned, as if the timeline was stretched to fit a story. Science offers a lens to test this conspiracy, but it raises as many questions as it answers. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, can date wooden artifacts with precision. A beam from a church attributed to Otto's reign, dated to 1000, shows growth patterns closer to 1050. You touch the wood, its grain a silent record of time, and wonder, was it reused or was the church built later than claimed? Radiocarbon dating, applied to relics from Otto's era, yields similar discrepancies. A cloth from a shrine, said to be blessed by Sylvester in 999, tests as 11th century. Scholars dismiss these as errors, but the pattern persists. The timeline, so carefully constructed, seems to wobble under scrutiny, its dates floating like leaves on a stream. Yet, there are those who defend the traditional narrative. Historians point to Otto's documented deeds, his campaigns in Italy, his alliance with the Pope, his efforts to unify a fragmented empire. The Vita Bernwardi, a biography of a bishop from Otto's court, describes his reign with vivid detail, its pages filled with dates and events. You read the text, its Latin crisp, its stories compelling. Could these be forgeries? Or are they the work of honest scribes, recording a turbulent age? The defenders argue that the scarcity of earlier records is no surprise. War, plague, and migration left Europe in chaos, its archives thin. But this explanation falters when you consider the precision of Otto's timeline. The year 1000 is too perfect, too deliberate, as if chosen to crown a king with divine purpose. In medieval tales, Otto III is depicted as a visionary, a ruler who saw himself as Christ's vicar on earth. Stories speak of a golden council in 1000, where Otto and Sylvester planned a new Christian era, their voices echoing with prophecies of the apocalypse. These tales, written centuries later, feel like embellishments, yet they cluster around the millennium, as if the date itself held a magnetic pull. You imagine Otto standing before his court, his crown catching the light, declaring his reign the fulfillment of a 1,000-year promise. But what if the council never happened? What if the year 1000 was a fiction, its radiance crafted to make Otto eternal? The conspiracy, if it exists, was not a secret plot with cloaked figures and hidden codes. You see the scribes, their quills moving in unison, copying annals, adjusting dates, harmonizing the timeline. A charter here, a papal decree there, a coronation shifted by a decade. The peasants mark time by seasons, the priests by feasts, the kings by victories. The beauty of the deception lies in its simplicity. A few key documents, a few trusted voices, and 3 centuries are born. A chronicle dated 1000 lies open, its ink fresh, its words too perfect. You wonder, is this history, or is it prophecy written to make the past serve the present? The question lingers, unanswered, as you step back into the hall. Otto's fresco looms above, his eyes fixed on a horizon you cannot see. The year 1000, so perfect, so holy, feels like a crown placed not on a man but on time itself. The phantom time hypothesis does not demand that Otto lied, but that he dreamed a dream so powerful it reshaped the past. Did Otto III rule in the year 1000, or did he create it? You drift across a shimmering desert, the sand warm beneath your feet, the horizon ablaze with the golden light of a setting Sunday. Above you, the stars begin to emerge, their patterns unchanged for millennia, whispering truths that transcend borders and empires. In the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries, when Europe's history grows dim, other civilizations, Islamic, Byzantine, Chinese, flourished, their scholars charting the heavens, their scribes filling libraries with knowledge. Yet, as you search their records for echoes of Europe's dark ages, you find a peculiar silence, a void where the West should be. The phantom time hypothesis points to this absence as a key. If 300 years were fabricated in Europe's timeline, would not these vibrant cultures have noticed? Let us journey eastward, not as historians bound by dates, but as travelers seeking the reflections of a lost time, chasing the whispers of civilizations that should have seen Europe's light but record only shadows. You begin in Baghdad, in the heart of the Islamic Golden Age. The House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, stands as a beacon of learning, its halls alive with the hum of debate and the scratch of quills. Here, in the early 9th century, scholars translate Greek philosophy, refine algebra, and map the stars with precision that rivals modern science. Their records are meticulous. Eclipses, comets, planetary alignments, all dated with care. A scroll from 760 details, a lunar eclipse, its shadow crossing the Arabian sky, yet no mention of a similar event in Europe, where monks should have seen the same moon. Another text, from 800, describes trade with Byzantium and Persia, but Europe, Francia, the supposed empire of Charlemagne, is absent, as if it were a ghost on the world stage. Why does this vibrant civilization, so connected to the world, say so little about the West? The silence is not total, but it is striking. Islamic chroniclers note battles with Byzantium, alliances with Persian rulers, and caravans crossing North Africa. Yet, when you search for references to Frankish kings or Saxon wars, the pages are blank. A merchant's ledger from Cordoba, dated 850, lists goods traded with Constantinople, but no mention of Aachen, no hint of Charlemagne's court. You imagine a trader, his camel laden with silk and spices, crossing the Mediterranean. He knows of Rome, of Constantinople, but the Franks are a rumour, their empire a whisper. The phantom time hypothesis suggests a chilling possibility. Perhaps there was no empire to notice. If the years 614 to 911 were invented, the Islamic world, unburdened by Europe's rewritten timeline, would have no reason to record its deeds. You stand in a bazaar, the voices of merchants blending into a hum. The absence of Europe feels like a missing note in a symphony, too subtle to disrupt the music, but too glaring to ignore. Now, let us cross the Bosporus to Constantinople, the glittering heart of the Byzantine Empire. This is a city of relentless bureaucracy, where every edict, tax roll, and naval log is catalogued with care. You enter an imperial archive, its shelves groaning under the weight of scrolls, each one a testament to an empire that never fell. The Byzantines, heirs to Rome, recorded everything: the color of a general's tunic, the cost of a fleet, the date of a saint's feast. Yet, in the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries, their records of Western Europe grow thin, almost vanishing. You unroll a parchment from the reign of Heraclius, 610 to 641, its ink detailing wars with Persia and the rise of Islam. But after him, a fog descends. The chronicles of the next 2 centuries are sparse, their accounts of the West vague or absent. A diplomat's report from 700 mentions trade with Italy, but no kings, no empires. A letter from 750 speaks of Slavic tribes, but nothing of Frankish conquests. You trace the text, your fingers catching on the smooth vellum. Did Byzantium, so meticulous in its record-keeping, simply forget the West? The silence is not chaos, it is a pause. The Byzantine Empire faced plagues, invasions, and religious strife, yet its bureaucracy endured. Constantinople was never sacked, its scribes never ceased. So why the gap? You wander through the Hagia Sophia, its domes soaring above, its mosaics glowing with saints and emperors. A mosaic dated to 800 shows, a figure with almond eyes, a style not seen until the 10th century. A chronicle by Theophanes the Confessor, written around 818, describes events from 284 to 813, but its accounts of the West are oddly repetitive, as if drawn from a single source or invented later. The phantom time hypothesis suggests that Byzantium, too, may have adjusted its timeline to align with the West's. When Otto III and Pope Sylvester II crafted their millennium in 1000, did Constantinople inherit their phantom years? You stand on a terrace overlooking the Bosporus, the water reflecting a sky that saw it all. The city's records should be a mirror, but they reflect only fragments of a Europe that may not have existed. Now, let us travel further east, to the courts of Tang Dynasty China. Here, time is measured with a precision that humbles the modern mind. Astronomers in Chang'an record eclipses, comets, and supernovae, their star charts preserved in silk and stone. You sit in a pavilion, a scroll open before you, its characters detailing an eclipse in 719, its path calculated to the minute. The record is unbroken, stretching back centuries, with no gaps, no missing years. Yet, when you search for Europe, the scroll is silent. A trade route along the Silk Road brings tales of Persia and Byzantium, but the Franks, the Saxons, the supposed empire of Charlemagne, they are absent. You imagine a Chinese merchant, his caravan winding through desert oases, hearing rumors of a distant West. But those rumors are faint, unrecorded, as if Europe were a myth beyond the horizon. This silence is not mere oversight. The Tang dynasty's records are exhaustive, their astronomers tracking the heavens with tools that rivaled those of Islam. A supernova in 668 is noted with awe, its light lingering for months, yet no European chronicle mentions it. A comet in 837 blazes across the sky, recorded in China and Japan, but Europe's monks are silent. You hold a jade tablet, its surface carved with celestial patterns. The stars do not lie, but the West's absence in these records feels like a void. The phantom time hypothesis suggests that Europe's missing centuries were not seen because they were not there. If 614 to 911 were fabricated, China's unbroken timeline would stand apart, its silence a testament to a truth Europe rewrote. Science offers a lens to probe this mystery, but it deepens the enigma. Astronomers today can reconstruct the sky of any year, mapping eclipses and comets with precision. A solar eclipse in 733, visible in Europe, is recorded in China but not in Francia. A lunar eclipse in 800, noted in Baghdad, finds no echo in Anglo-Saxon annals. You study a modern star chart, its lines confirming what the ancients should have seen. The discrepancies are not random, they cluster in the phantom centuries, as if Europe's sky was unwatched. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, supports China's timeline. Its sequence is unbroken from the 7th century onward. In Europe, however, the rings falter, with timbers from supposed 8th century sites dating to the 10th. You touch a tree stump, its rings a silent calendar, and wonder, did Europe's scribes miss the stars? Or did they live in years that never passed? Yet, there are those who argue the silence is explainable. Byzantium was consumed by internal strife, iconoclasm, Arab invasions, Slavic migrations leaving little time to note the West. Islamic scholars focused on their own empires, their gaze turned eastward. China, distant and self-contained, had no reason to record a fractured Europe. The explanations are plausible, but they strain under the weight of repetition. 3 civilizations, each meticulous in its own way, should have noticed a rising Frankish empire, a crowned Charlemagne, a reborn Rome. Their silence feels deliberate, as if the West was not ignored, but absent. The silence of the Islamic, Byzantine, and Chinese records about Europe's phantom centuries hangs heavy, a riddle wrapped in the vastness of time. The phantom time hypothesis leaves you standing at the edge of a question. Did these civilizations overlook a fractured West, or did they gaze upon a Europe that was not there? If these tales of vanished histories stir your imagination, I invite you to explore more in our Lost Civilizations playlist, where other forgotten worlds await. Share your thoughts below. What do you think lies behind this silence? The stars remain, their light untouched by our stories, but the question burns. If 300 years were woven into Europe's timeline, did the world simply turn its gaze away? You are seated at a long wooden table, its surface scarred by centuries, in a room bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Around you, shelves groan under the weight of manuscripts, their pages filled with elegant script, their margins adorned with intricate designs. This is a scriptorium, the heart of what history calls the Carolingian Renaissance, a supposed rebirth of learning and culture in the 8th and 9th centuries under the reign of Charlemagne. The air hums with the promise of knowledge, of Latin revived, of ancient texts preserved, of a new era dawning in a Europe emerging from chaos. This Renaissance, so celebrated, so perfectly timed, feels too polished, too sudden. The phantom time hypothesis casts a shadow over this golden age, suggesting it may not be a revival at all, but a reconstruction, a history written later, dated earlier, to fill a void in time. Let us explore this chamber of learning, not as students of the past, but as investigators of a puzzle, piecing together a Renaissance that might be more myth than reality. The Carolingian Renaissance is heralded as a miracle of its age. In a Europe said to be reeling from the fall of Rome, where literacy waned and roads crumbled, Charlemagne's court sparked a revival. Scholars like Alcuin of York, Paul the Deacon, and Theodulf of Orleans gathered in Aachen, crafting standardized Latin, producing grammar books, and copying ancient texts. The Carolingian minuscule, a clear and elegant script, emerged as the ancestor of modern lowercase letters, its uniformity a marvel in an age of supposed disorder. You trace a finger along a page of Virgil, its letters sharp, its punctuation precise. The manuscript is dated to 800, yet its clarity rivals texts from centuries later. The story is compelling. A king, inspired by Rome's glory, restores learning to a darkened continent. But the details do not align. How does a fractured empire, barely literate, produce such sophistication in a single generation? The manuscripts are the first clue. You open another, a copy of Cicero's works, its pages labelled 820. The Latin is pristine, the grammar refined, the margins filled with glosses that suggest a deep engagement with classical thought. Yet, when you compare it to texts from the 6th century, the contrast is stark. Those earlier works, from the twilight of Rome, are fragmented, their Latin rough, their scripts varied. The Carolingian texts, by contrast, appear as if from nowhere, their style more akin to the 11th century than the 8th. You visit the Vatican Library, its oldest complete Latin manuscripts dated to the 9th century. Just as this Renaissance begins, earlier texts, from the 6th or 7th centuries are rare, often mere fragments. The abundance of Carolingian manuscripts feels like a flood after a drought. But where were the scribes before? Were they hiding, or were these texts created later, backdated to give the illusion of a cultural rebirth? The schools of Charlemagne's empire deepen the mystery. You walk through a reconstructed classroom, its benches lined with imagined students, their slates marked with Latin conjugations. These cathedral schools, credited to Charlemagne's reforms, are said to have trained a new generation of clerics, spreading literacy across Europe. But the buildings themselves tell a different story. In Tours, a school dated to 790 stands on foundations that match 11th century designs. In Fulda, a monastery library claims manuscripts from 800, but the shelves are built with techniques not seen until 950. You examine a textbook, its pages outlining a curriculum that feels strikingly modern, with logic and rhetoric more akin to later scholasticism than to an age of chaos. The phantom time hypothesis whispers, what if these schools were not founded in the 8th century, but in the 10th or 11th? Their origins pushed back to create a narrative of revival. Now, let us follow a thread of legend, one that weaves through the manuscripts like a hidden code. In medieval tales, the Carolingian Renaissance is not just a revival, it is a miracle, a divine gift from a king touched by God. Stories tell of Charlemagne himself, dictating laws in flawless Latin, debating theology with scholars, and commissioning golden manuscripts that shimmer with divine light. You read a chronicle, written in 1100, that describes a great council of learning in Aachen, where Charlemagne gathered the wisest minds of Europe. But the chronicle is late, its details vague, and no earlier record confirms such a council. Another tale speaks of a lost library in Aachen, burned by invaders but miraculously preserved in hidden vaults. You imagine the flames, the ashes, the convenient loss of evidence. Could these stories be inventions, crafted to explain why the Renaissance feels so sudden, so disconnected from the centuries before? Science steps in, its tools probing the manuscripts and buildings for truth. Radiocarbon dating, applied to the parchment of a supposed 8th century text, often yields dates closer to 1000. A wooden lectern from a Carolingian school tests as 11th century. You hold a fragment of vellum, its fibers betraying a younger age than its label claims. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, tells a similar tale. Beams from a monastery dated to 800 show growth patterns aligned with 950. Scholars dismiss these as reused materials, but the pattern is too consistent, too widespread. The artifacts of the Carolingian Renaissance books, buildings, even the ink seem to belong to a later era, as if the entire movement was crafted after the fact, its dates assigned to fill a historical void. Yet, there are those who defend the Renaissance as real. Historians point to the Admonitio Generalis, a decree from 789, in which Charlemagne orders the establishment of schools and the copying of texts. The document is real, its seal intact, its Latin authoritative. In monasteries like Street, Gaul, manuscripts attributed to the 9th century survive, their pages filled with classical works and biblical commentaries. You leaf through one, its ink faded but legible. Could these be the work of a genuine revival, a flicker of light in a dark age? The defenders argue that the scarcity of earlier texts is no surprise. Parchment was precious, libraries were burned, and scribes were few. But the leap from near illiteracy to sophisticated scholarship feels too abrupt, too perfect, as if the Renaissance was not a gradual awakening, but a sudden invention. A darker possibility emerges. To compete with older dioceses, he needs a history, a legacy. So, he commissions manuscripts, dates them to 800, and claims they were copied under Charlemagne's patronage. The scriptorium hums with activity, scribes crafting texts that mimic classical style, their dates chosen to align with a mythic king. The phantom time hypothesis suggests this was not a single act, but a collective effort, driven by the need to give Europe a cultural foundation. The Carolingian Renaissance, with its schools, scripts, and texts, becomes a bridge, linking the fall of Rome to the rise of the High Middle Ages, filling a gap that might not have existed. Dated to 820, it rivals the artistry of later Romanesque works. The pigments, the brushwork, the motifs they feel too advanced, too refined for an age of supposed decline. In another monastery, a gospel book from 850 mirrors, designs not seen until 1050. You trace the lines, their precision unsettling. The phantom time hypothesis does not deny the beauty of these works, but questions their dates, suggesting they were made later, backdated to serve a narrative of rebirth. The Carolingian Renaissance is a cornerstone of Europe's history, yet it floats, unmoored from the centuries before and after. You wonder, was it a spark in the darkness, or a story written to light a past that never burned? The candle on the table gutters, its flame casting one last flicker across the pages. The truth, like the light, remains just out of reach, but the question lingers, sharp and unyielding. Is the Carolingian Renaissance a revival, or a reconstruction of a time that never was? Their sagas sing of raids, kings, and conquests, painting the 8th and 9th centuries as a time of fire and fury. Yet, as you search the earth for their traces, the ground yields little scattered coins, a few runestones, and a silence that echoes across Europe. The phantom time hypothesis casts a shadow over these tales, suggesting that the Vikings, along with other peoples like the Avars, Slavs, and Frisians, may have left so few marks because their time was not as we know it. What if these centuries, from 614 to 911 Anno Domini, were not lived but written, their stories crafted to fill a historical void? Let us sail into this mystery, not as warriors seeking glory, but as wanderers chasing the ghosts of peoples who seem to have vanished from time itself. The Viking Age begins, so the chronicles claim, with a thunderous raid on Lindisfarne in 793. Monks flee as Norse warriors torch the monastery, their axes gleaming in the twilight. But as you kneel at the site, sifting through the soil, the evidence is thin. A few burned timbers, some scattered debris, but no mass graves, no hoard of Viking weapons. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written decades later, tells of the raid, but its details are sparse, its tone almost mythic. You trace the outline of a stone foundation, wondering, was this the scene of a legendary attack, or a tale spun to explain a quieter truth? The phantom time hypothesis suggests that the Viking Age, so neatly dated to the 8th century, may have been crafted later, its raids and heroes backdated to fill a timeline that needed drama. Across Europe, the pattern repeats. The Vikings, we are told, struck like lightning, their longships raiding England, France, and Ireland. Rivers burned, monasteries fell, and entire towns were said to vanish. Yet, the archaeological record tells a different story. In Repton, England, a site linked to the great heathen army of 865, excavations uncover a grave with bones from multiple centuries, jumbled together as if time itself was confused. You hold a rusted sword, its blade dated to the 9th century, but its style matches weapons from the 10th. The chronicles speak of Viking kings, Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar the Boneless, whose names echo through sagas, but their existence blurs into legend. Ragnar, the hero of countless tales, may be a composite, his deeds a blend of many warlords, their stories pinned to a century that may not have existed. You imagine a skald, his voice rising in a smoky hall, weaving tales of a past that never was, his words shaping history as much as any sword. Now, let us turn to other peoples, those who seem to vanish in these phantom centuries. The Avars, fierce horsemen of the steppe, ruled Central Europe from Hungary, their ring-shaped fortresses a testament to their power. Chronicles place them in the 6th century, thriving until the early 9th, when they fade abruptly. You walk through one such fortress, its earthworks crumbling, its artifacts scarce. A few coins, some jewelry, but nothing to fill 3 centuries of supposed dominance. The soil yields Roman relics, then leaps to 10th century finds, as if the Avars held their breath for generations. Historians suggest they were absorbed by the Franks, their culture dissolved, but the absence is too clean. too complete. You stand in a field, once their heartland, and feel the silence. Did the Avars vanish, or were they never there in the way we imagine? The Slavs, spreading across Eastern Europe, tell a similar tale. Their settlements, described as wooden huts in the 7th century, should evolve gradually into the stone towns of the High Middle Ages. But the archaeological record skips, jumping from primitive villages to complex grids after 900. You explore a Slavic site, its wells clean, its pottery dated to 950, but beneath lies Roman soil, with no trace of the centuries between. The Frisians, seafarers of the North Sea, are said to have traded and raided in the 8th century, resisting Frankish rule. Yet their harbours, their graves, their markets leave little mark until the 10th century, when they burst into view with coins and charters. You sift through a Frisian midden, expecting broken dishes, lost tools, but find only silence. The phantom time hypothesis whispers, what if these peoples were not lost, but misplaced, their stories written later to fill a gap in time? Science probes this mystery, its tools seeking truth in the earth. Radiocarbon dating, applied to Viking graves, often yields dates later than expected. A shield from 800 tests closer to 950, a bone from 850, aligns with 1000. You hold a fragment of antler, carved with runes, its carbon date a century off its label. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, tells a similar story. A Viking ship, buried in a mound dated to 800, shows timber cut in 950. Scholars explain these as reused materials, but the pattern is relentless, repeating across sites from Denmark to England. DNA analysis, a newer tool, reveals continuity in European populations, suggesting the Slavs, Avars, and Frisians did not vanish but persisted. Yet, their material footprint in the phantom centuries is faint, as if they lived but left no shadow. You wonder, is the science wrong, or is the timeline itself a fiction? Legends weave through this silence, their stories as haunting as the empty earth. In Scandinavia, tales speak of a phantom fleet, longships that sailed into fog and never returned, their crews lost to time. In Slavic lore, a ghost village is said to have vanished in the 8th century, its people swallowed by the forest. These myths, dismissed as folklore, cluster around the phantom centuries, as if the collective memory sensed a void. You stand by a fjord, the water dark and still, imagining a ship fading into mist. Were these tales born of real loss, or were they crafted to explain a history that never happened? The sagas, written in the 12th and 13th centuries, long after the events they describe, feel like bridges built over a chasm, their stories filling a gap no one dared to question. The defenders of history offer explanations. The Vikings, they say, were nomadic, their settlements temporary, their graves unmarked. The Avars and Frisians were absorbed by larger empires, their cultures erased. The Slavs, scattered across vast forests, left little to find. You consider this, walking through a Danish village, its houses reconstructed from sparse remains. The arguments are logical, but they falter under scrutiny. Even nomadic peoples leave traces, campsites, tools, bones. The Roman Empire, in its decline, filled the earth with debris. The High Middle Ages overflow with artifacts. Why then do these centuries yield so little? You touch a rune stone, its inscription dated to 850, but its carving matches styles from 1000. The stone is real, but its date feels like a guess, a label pinned to a past that may not have existed. Imagine a 12th century monk, his quill poised over vellum, tasked with writing the history of his people. The records are thin, the years uncertain. To give his king a legacy, he crafts a saga, dating it to 800, filling it with raids and heroes. The Vikings become a myth, their deeds backdated to explain a Christianized present. The Avars, Slavs, and Frisians are given roles in this story, their histories shaped to fit a timeline that serves the church and crown. You see the monk, his candle burning low, creating a past that never was. The phantom time hypothesis does not claim these peoples did not exist, but that their stories were misplaced, their centuries invented to bridge a gap between Rome's fall and Europe's rise. The Vikings, the Avars, the Slavs, their names echo through history, but their time feels like a shadow, cast by a light that may not have burned. The phantom time hypothesis asks you to question not just their lives, but the centuries they are said to have lived in. As you stand here, the wind carrying the salt of the sea, I find myself curious about where you are right now. Are you listening from a coastal town, where the waves echo this ancient shore, or perhaps a quiet room far from the sea's call? What hour is it in your corner of the world, as you sail through these mysteries? The horizon stretches before you, vast and unyielding, holding truths no saga can fully capture. Did these peoples walk the earth in the years we claim, or were their stories woven to bridge a time that never was? You are seated in a quiet study, its walls lined with bookshelves that sag under the weight of countless volumes. Spread before you are papers, articles, and digital screens glowing with scanned manuscripts, each one a fragment of the past meticulously catalogued by modern scholars. Yet, as you sift through these records, a question stirs, sharp and persistent. Why do the historians of today, armed with science and skepticism, remain so silent about the cracks in the timeline? The phantom time hypothesis, with its bold claim that 300 years of European history, from 614 to 911 Anno Domini, may have been fabricated, lingers like a forbidden whisper in academic halls. If the evidence is as thin as it seems, scant artifacts, misaligned dates, and eerie absences, why do so few dare to speak? Let us step into the world of modern scholarship, not as students seeking answers, but as quiet eavesdroppers, listening for the truths that remain unspoken. The desk before you holds a journal article, its pages dense with footnotes. It discusses a Carolingian manuscript dated to 800, but the author notes, almost in passing, that its script resembles styles from the 11th century. Another paper, tucked in a folder, analyzes a church dated to 750, yet its dendrochronology suggests construction in 950. These anomalies are not secrets, they are published, peer-reviewed, and accessible. You flip through a database of archaeological reports, each one cataloguing finds from the so-called Dark Ages. The data is sparse. A few coins, a handful of pottery shards, a scattering of bones. The reports acknowledge the scarcity, but the conclusions are cautious, hedged with phrases like preservation bias or limited excavation. If the evidence is so thin, why does the timeline remain unchallenged? Why do historians, trained to question, seem to tiptoe around the void? The phantom time hypothesis, first proposed by Heribert Illig in the 1990 seconds, offers a provocative answer. The timeline is not just flawed, it is a construct, a fiction woven by medieval scribes and upheld by modern scholars, too invested in tradition to question it. Illig's theory is not hidden. His books, though controversial, are available, his arguments debated in small circles. You pick up one, its cover worn, its pages filled with charts comparing archaeological finds to historical dates. Illig points to the lack of physical evidence from 614 to 911, fewer coins than in Roman times, fewer buildings than in the High Middle Ages, fewer graves than expected for millions of lives. He notes the misalignment of eclipses, the uniformity of manuscripts, the suddenness of the Carolingian Renaissance. You read his words, their logic sharp but unorthodox, and wonder, if he is wrong, why is he dismissed so quickly? If he is right, why is the response not debate, but silence? The silence is not absolute, but it is heavy. You find traces of doubt in the margins of academia, footnotes, conference whispers, obscure blogs. A German archaeologist, in a paper from 2005, notes that a fortress dated to 800 lacks the expected layers of occupation, its artifacts resembling those from 1000. A British historian, speaking at a seminar, admits that the Annales Regni Francorum, a key source for Charlemagne's reign, was written decades later, its dates potentially adjusted. These voices are faint, rarely amplified. You imagine a professor, grey-haired and cautious, standing before a lecture hall, A student asks about the phantom time hypothesis, and he chuckles, calling it fringe. But his eyes linger, his tone softens, and he adds, "It is curious, though, how little we find from those years." The moment passes, the subject changes, but the doubt remains, unspoken, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Why the silence? The answer lies not in conspiracy, but in structure. You walk through a university archive, its climate-controlled rooms humming with precision. Every manuscript, every artifact, is labelled with a date circa 722, circa 843, based on a consensus built over centuries. This consensus is the foundation of modern history, a scaffolding that supports textbooks, museum exhibits, and academic careers. To question it is to risk more than reputation. It is to challenge the system itself. You open a catalogue, its metadata linking a coin to 800, but the entry cites a 19th century scholar who relied on an 18th century chronicle. The chain of trust is long, fragile, and rarely tested. If a single link breaks, if the year 800 is questioned, the entire structure trembles. Museums would need new labels, textbooks, new editions, and professors' new lectures. The cost is not just intellectual, it is institutional. Yet, the evidence persists, stubborn and unsettling. You examine a digital scan of a manuscript, its date listed as 775, but its references to events mirror those from the 11th century. A coin from Charlemagne's reign, minted in 804, bears stamps used in later centuries. An archaeological report from a dig in France notes a church dated to 798, but its foundation stones align with techniques from 1000. These are not isolated errors, they form a pattern, a constellation of discrepancies that points to a timeline stretched beyond its truth. You sit at a conference table, imagining a panel of historians debating these finds. One suggests the coins were reused, another blames poor preservation, a third proposes scribal error. But no one asks, what if the timeline itself is wrong? The question is too vast, too disruptive, like a crack in a cathedral's foundation. A whisper of legend weaves through this silence, not from medieval scribes, but from the modern era. In academic circles, stories circulate of lost papers, research that dared to question the timeline but was never published. A graduate student, it is said, found a mismatch in carbon dates from a 9th century site, but her advisor urged caution, fearing backlash. An archaeologist, now retired, once hinted at a dig that uncovered no 8th century layers, only Roman and later medieval ones, but his report was shelved, deemed inconclusive. These tales, half rumour, half truth, suggest a deeper unease. You imagine a scholar, late at night, staring at a screen filled with data that does not fit. She hesitates, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, knowing that to publish is to invite ridicule, to question is to risk exile. The phantom time hypothesis, though dismissed as fringe, lingers in these shadows, a challenge no one dares fully embrace. Science offers tools to probe the past, but it cannot break the silence. Radiocarbon dating, dendrochronology, and DNA analysis reveal discrepancies, but they rely on historical context to interpret them. A bone dated to 800 may test as 950, but the result is adjusted to fit the accepted timeline. You hold a report, its graphs showing a cluster of artifacts dated later than their labels, but the conclusion is cautious, citing calibration errors. The tools are precise, but the framework is human, built on assumptions that no one questions. You wonder, what if the science is right, but the history is wrong? What if the timeline, so carefully guarded, is a house built on sand? You read a textbook, its chapters tracing the arc of the Middle Ages, each date a milestone, each event a certainty. The author, a respected historian, cites primary sources, but those sources cite older sources, a chain stretching back to medieval scribes. To challenge it is to face not just skepticism, but the weight of centuries. You imagine a historian, her office lined with awards, dismissing the phantom time hypothesis with a wave. Impossible, she says, but her voice falters when pressed for evidence. The silence is not ignorance, it is survival, a choice to preserve the narrative over pursuing the unknown. The study feels smaller now, its walls closing in with the weight of unspoken questions. The phantom time hypothesis does not demand that historians are wrong, but that they are human, bound by the same need for order that drove medieval scribes to invent centuries. You step to the window, the night sky clear above you. The stars, eternal and unyielding, care nothing for dates or empires. They shine, as they always have, over a world that writes its own truths. The silence of modern historians is not a lie, it is a choice, a refusal to disturb a timeline that has stood for centuries. But the question remains, glowing like an ember in the dark. If 300 years were added to history, would anyone dare to say so? Its walls rise in solemn grey, their surfaces carved with crude vines and saints, the air around them thick with the scent of earth and time. A faded inscription declares it was built in 739, a beacon of faith in a turbulent age. But as you trace the mortar with your fingers, a doubt takes root. The stones, the arches, the very design of this church mirror others across Europe, some dated centuries later, as if time itself paused in their construction. The phantom time hypothesis casts a shadow over these structures, suggesting that many buildings from the 7th to 9th centuries may not belong to the years they claim. Were these churches, crypts and crosses erected in the Dark Ages, or were they crafted later, their dates forged to anchor a history that needed roots? Let us wander through these stone relics, not as pilgrims seeking salvation, but as detectives searching for the truth hidden in their seams. From France to Germany, Spain to Norway, structures dated to the phantom centuries, 614 to 911 Anno Domini, share an eerie sameness. You visit a chapel in Bavaria, its plaque proclaiming a founding in 800. Its rounded arches and rough-hewn columns match a Spanish church dated to 950 and an English one from 1050. The similarity is striking, almost unnatural, as if a single hand designed them all. You step inside, the cool air brushing your skin, and notice the carvings. Interwoven vines, broad-faced saints, circles behind Christ's head. These motifs repeat in crosses and crypts across Europe, some labelled 750, others 900, their craftsmanship indistinguishable. You pause at a stone altar, its edges worn but precise. Did these buildings rise in the chaos of the Dark Ages, or were they built later, their dates chosen to claim an ancient legacy? The phantom time hypothesis offers a bold explanation. These structures may have been backdated, their origins rewritten to give the medieval church and its rulers a deeper past. Picture a 10th century bishop, his diocese new and untested. To rival older sees, he needs a history, a claim to apostolic roots. So, he declares his church founded in 712, its stones laid by a saint whose name echoes in later chronicles. Masons are summoned, charters written, and the building is dated to a time no one can verify. You imagine the bishop, his voice steady as he dedicates the church, his congregation unaware that the stones are fresh, the ink still wet. The deception is not malicious, it is strategic, a way to make the present holy by tying it to a distant past. The church stands, its date carved in stone, and history accepts it without question. Science steps in to test these claims, its tools probing the stones for truth. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, can date wooden beams with precision. You examine a rafter from a church dated to 800, its rings tight and clear, but they align with trees felled in 950. Another, from a crypt labelled 850, tests closer to 1000. Scholars explain these as reused timbers, a common practice in a resource-scarce world, but the pattern repeats across dozens of sites. Radiocarbon dating, applied to organic remains in mortar or plaster, tells a similar story. A wall from a supposed 8th century chapel yields a date near 1050. You hold a fragment of plaster, its texture gritty under your fingers, its age betraying the plaque's claim. The science is not infallible, calibration relies on historical context, but the discrepancies cluster in the phantom centuries, as if the buildings themselves whisper of a later birth. The architecture itself raises questions. You walk through a crypt, its barrel vaults attributed to 820, but the corbelled stones and chisel marks match techniques from the 11th century. In Norway, a stave church dated to 850 boasts runes and carvings that resemble those from 1100. The Romanesque style, with its thick walls and rounded arches, is said to emerge around 1000, yet elements appear in churches dated to 800, as if the style was born early or dated late. You stand beneath a Romanesque arch, its curve perfect, its stones too uniform for an age of supposed decline. Historians argue that these buildings show continuity, their builders reusing Roman materials to echo an ancient past. But the placement is too deliberate, the columns too perfectly aligned, as if crafted to evoke antiquity rather than inherit it. You touch a Roman spolia, a column embedded in a 9th century wall. Its marble is smooth, but the mortar around it is fresh, suggesting not reuse, but recreation. Legends weave through these stones, their stories as haunting as the buildings themselves. In Ireland, a tale speaks of a church that rose in a single night, its walls built by angels in 750. In Germany, a monastery claims a crypt from 800, said to have housed a miracle that drew pilgrims for centuries. You read the chronicle, its pages written in 1150, describing a saint whose relics appeared in a vision, dated to 680. These stories, vibrant but late, feel like justifications, crafted to explain why a building's age feels older than its stones. The phantom time hypothesis suggests that these legends were not memories, but inventions, created to fill a gap in time. You imagine a monk, his quill scratching in the candlelight, writing a tale of divine construction to give his church a pedigree no one could challenge. The defenders of the timeline offer explanations. The Dark Ages, they say, were a time of scarcity, when builders used simple techniques and salvaged materials. The uniformity of churches reflects rural isolation, not forgery. You consider this, standing in a village square, a stone cross dated to 780 looming nearby. Its carvings match others from 950, but historians call it a local tradition, a style unchanged by time. The argument is plausible, but it strains under scrutiny. Even isolated communities innovate, tools improve, designs shift, hands falter. The Roman Empire left countless variations in its architecture. The High Middle Ages burst with new forms. Why then do the phantom centuries show so little change? You trace the cross's vines, their lines too perfect, as if carved by a single school of masons across 300 years. Imagine a 12th century mason, his chisel steady, working under orders to build a church that looks ancient. The bishop hands him a design, its arches and motifs drawn from a mythic past, and instructs him to carve a date, 800. The mason complies, unaware that he is crafting history, not just stone. You see him, his hands dusted with lime, shaping a narrative that will stand for centuries. The phantom time hypothesis does not claim these buildings are false, but that their dates are assigned to make new structures seem eternal. The churches, crypts, and crosses become tools, not of worship, but of time, their ages chosen to give the medieval world a foundation it lacked. The stones are real, their weight undeniable, but their dates feel like whispers, soft and uncertain. The phantom time hypothesis asks you to question not the buildings, but the timeline they inhabit. Were these churches built in the Dark Ages, their stones laid by hands that knew no better? Or were they raised later, their dates carved to claim a past that never was? The architecture stands, solid and enduring, but the years it claims may be as fleeting as the wind that stirs the grass. You stand at the edge of a vast, open plain, the horizon stretching unbroken under a sky heavy with stars. The wind carries the faint hum of a world that measures its days with clocks and calendars, each tick a promise of certainty. But as you gaze across the field, the ground feels less solid, as if the very years beneath your feet might be a story, not a truth. The phantom time hypothesis has led you through shadows of history, empty graves, silent chronicles, churches with questionable dates suggesting that 300 years, from 614 to 911 Anno Domini, may have been woven into the timeline by hands driven by ambition, faith, and the need for meaning. Is it a river flowing steadily from past to present, or a tapestry carefully stitched by human hands to tell a story we need to believe? Let us walk this final path, not as seekers of facts, but as listeners to a tale that shapes the world, wondering if time is not a record, but a narrative we have all agreed to live within. A broken potsherd, a rusted coin, a weathered stone cross, each bearing a date, a claim to history. You pick up the coin, its surface stamped with the year 800, and feel its weight, real and cold. But the date, so precise, seems to float, unmoored from the earth that yielded it. The phantom time hypothesis argues that such dates are not anchors, but inventions, crafted to fill a gap between the fall of Rome and the rise of modern Europe. The records are sparse, the years uncertain, so he chooses a date 700, 800, 900, not because it is true, but because it fits the story. The king needs a lineage, the church needs antiquity, and the people need a past to believe in. You see him, his quill scratching in the quiet, creating time itself, each stroke a thread in a tapestry that becomes history. This tapestry is not woven by one hand, but by many. You walk through a village, its houses clustered around a church, its people marking time by seasons and saints' days. To them, the year matters little. What matters is the rhythm of planting, harvesting, praying. But in the monasteries, in the courts, time is power. A bishop declares his church founded in 732, its charter dated to prove its age. A king claims descent from Charlemagne, his reign tied to 800 to echo Rome's glory. These dates are not lies, they are necessities, tools to unify a fractured world. You imagine a council, its members gathered around a table, debating how to align their history with prophecy. The year 1000 looms, a number heavy with divine meaning. To reach it, they stretch the timeline, adding reigns, battles, and miracles that never were. The tapestry grows, its threads interlocking until the fiction becomes unbreakable, accepted by all who read it. The stars above you burn with a truth untouched by human hands, but even they are woven into the story. You recall the eclipses, their paths misaligned with Europe's chronicles, recorded faithfully in China and Islam, but absent in the West. The phantom time hypothesis suggests these absences are not errors, but evidence of years that never passed. Yet, the story of time is not just about missing centuries, it is about why we need them. You stand beneath a sky that has seen empires rise and fall, its light unchanged for millennia. The stars do not care for dates, but humans do, for dates give meaning. A coronation in 1000 feels divine. A church founded in 700 feels eternal. The narrative of time is not about what happened, but what must have happened to make the present make sense. You wonder, if the timeline is a story, who is its author? The answer lies not in a single villain, but in the collective need for order. You imagine a 10th century Europe, its kingdoms fragile, its church seeking authority. The fall of Rome left a void, a gap that threatened to unravel the present. So, scribes and scholars filled it, not with malice, but with purpose. They wrote of Charlemagne, of Viking raids, of saints and miracles, dating them to centuries that bridged the past to the future. You see a monk, his eyes tired, copying a chronicle that places a battle in 750. The battle may be real, but the date is chosen, a thread in the tapestry. Over time, the copies multiply, the story hardens, and the timeline becomes truth. You walk through a library, its shelves heavy with these chronicles, each one a layer in a narrative that no one questions, for to question it is to unravel the world. Science, with its tools of carbon and tree rings, probes this narrative, but it cannot rewrite it. You hold a report, its pages detailing a coin dated to 800, but its metal tests as 950. A church beam, labelled 850, shows growth rings from 1000. These discrepancies are noted, but dismissed reused materials, calibration errors, preservation bias. The science is precise, but its interpretation is human. bound by the same narrative that shaped the timeline. You imagine a modern archaeologist, her trowel uncovering a layer of earth that should hold 8th century debris but is empty. She writes her report, cautious and measured, knowing that to challenge the timeline is to challenge centuries of consensus. The narrative is too vast, too entrenched, to be undone by a single dig or date. Yet, the story is not without its cracks. You recall the legends, the tales of lost cities and phantom fleets woven into the gaps of history. These are not just myths, they are echoes of a doubt, a sense that time is not as solid as it seems. You stand now in a modern city, its streets alive with the hum of clocks and calendars. The date is the 4th of October 2025, or so your phone declares. But as you look at the glowing screen, the phantom time hypothesis whispers, what if it is 1728? What if the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, the Middle Ages are closer than you think? Their dates stretched by a story that needed them to be far away. Time is not a river, it is a tale, told by those who needed it to be true. You step back, the plain stretching around you, the stars above unyielding. The phantom time hypothesis does not demand that you reject history, but that you question it. You imagine a future archaeologist, digging through your world, finding your phone, your coffee cup, your bones. Will they date them correctly? Or will they too weave a story, placing your life in a century that fits their needs? The thought lingers, soft but insistent. Time is not a truth, it is a choice, a consensus we inherit without question. You look up, the stars are silent witness to a world that writes its own past. The plane is quiet now, but the story continues, its threads stretching into the darkness, inviting you to wonder, what if time is not what we think, but what we have made it to be?